My name is Catherine, and betrayal ripped my life apart. The man I married, the one I trusted with everything, was sleeping with my best friend, the woman I called a sister. Together, they painted me as unstable, convincing everyone that I was losing my mind. But while they laughed behind my back, I stayed silent, collecting every word, every secret, every lie. And when the moment was right, I exposed them in front of his entire family. Stay with me, share where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. The first thing you need to understand is that revenge doesn't happen in silence. It has a sound. Sometimes it's the crash of glass when a mask finally shatters. Other times, it's a single gasp, the kind that slices through a room like a blade. But tonight, in the polished dining room of my in-laws' Chicago mansion, revenge had a voice. Their voices. And every single one of them was about to hear it. I sat there at the long mahogany table, every inch of me composed, elegant, poised, exactly the way they all expected me to be. My husband, Daniel, sat at the head of the table, proud and smug, with his arm slung over the back of his chair as if he owned not just the house, but the people inside it. To his left, my best friend, or rather the woman who had once worn that title, leaned in, laughing softly at something he whispered. She looked radiant in that way. Only the guilty do when they think they've gotten away with something. The clinking of silverware, the hum of conversation, the occasional polite laughter. It all blended into a dull roar inside my head. My heart beat steady, not fast, not frantic. I had prepared too long for this moment to be nervous. I was calm, deadly calm, the kind of calm that only comes when you know you've already won. Under the tablecloth, hidden from their view, I held the small black remote in my hand. A single button stood between their carefully curated lies and the truth I had stitched together piece by piece, night after night, when they thought I was sleeping. It would have been so easy to crumble, to accept the narrative they painted of me. Catherine the paranoid, Catherine the hysterical, Catherine the woman unraveling in front of everyone. But I hadn't unraveled. I had sharpened. And tonight, they were going to bleed on the shards. Daniel cleared his throat, tapping his knife gently against his glass to command the room's attention. The chatter died down immediately. His family always listened when he spoke. That was the thing about him. He had everyone convinced he was the perfect husband, the successful son, the charming leader. He had charisma, I'll give him that. But charisma is just perfume overwrought. And I had peeled back every layer to find the maggots beneath. To family, he began, raising his glass with that rehearsed sincerity that used to fool me too. To loyalty. To the ties that bind us together through good times and bad. To the people we can always trust. I almost laughed out loud. Trust. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. My fingers tightened around the remote, my thumb brushing the button. Across the table, she, my so-called best friend, raised her glass too, her eyes catching mine for the briefest moment. There was no flicker of guilt in them, no hesitation. Just a challenge. She thought she had won. I leaned back in my chair, my lips curving into a faint smile I didn't bother hiding. Because in less than a minute, that look of smug security would melt off her face, replaced by horror. And Daniel would learn what it felt like to choke on his own lies while his empire of deception collapsed around him. But I wasn't going to hit the button yet. No, revenge is a dish best served calculated. You don't just swing the axe, you make sure the blade glints in the candlelight first so they know it's coming. The dinner continued, course after course. His father bragged about Daniel's latest business venture. His mother complimented my best friend's dress, blissfully unaware of the betrayal it clothed. The air was warm, the wine expensive, the conversation shallow. To anyone else, this would seem like a perfect evening, but to me, it was the last supper before the reckoning. My mind drifted back to the first time I knew something was wrong. A late-night phone call. A laugh that wasn't meant for me. The way Daniel's shirt smelled faintly of her perfume one morning. I had confronted him, of course, and he had looked at me with those sharp blue eyes, full of practiced disappointment, and said, "Catherine, you're imagining things again. You really need help." And she had put her hand on mine, squeezing it like she was consoling me, whispering, "Honey, you can't keep doing this to yourself. You're starting to sound crazy." Crazy. That was their favorite word, their weapon. They wielded it so easily, so cruelly, until even the people I trusted most began to look at me with doubt. My world narrowed into a suffocating box of gaslight and manipulation. They stripped me of my credibility, my stability, my voice. What they didn't realize was that silence has its uses. They thought I was breaking. But in my silence, I was watching, recording, collecting, and tonight, the silence was ending. I glanced around the table again, my gaze moving from face to face. His parents, his siblings, their spouses, nieces and nephews, all gathered for this family dinner, all blissfully unaware that they were about to become witnesses in the trial of Daniel and his mistress, and I would be judge, jury, and executioner. "Catherine," his mother said, pulling me from my thoughts, "you've been so quiet tonight. Is everything all right, dear?" I smiled at her, the kind of smile that conceals daggers. "Oh, everything's perfect. In fact," I trailed off deliberately, my hand tightening around the remote. "Things are about to get very interesting." The room shifted slightly, curiosity sparking. Daniel raised an eyebrow at me, suspicion flickering across his face. She leaned back in her chair, her laugh a little too forced now. I had unsettled them, and that was good. Fear is most delicious when it begins with confusion. I set my wine glass down carefully, the crystal catching the chandelier's light. The room was hushed again, waiting for me to explain myself. My heart beat steadily, like a drum leading soldiers into battle. I had imagined this moment for weeks. Every detail, every sound, every expression. It was here. It was happening. I drew a breath, sat a little straighter, and let my eyes sweep across the table one last time. The calm before the storm. The last second before the match struck the fuse. Then, slowly, deliberately, I lifted the remote above the table where everyone could see it. The conversations faltered into silence. Daniel frowned, his charm slipping for the first time all evening. "What's that?" he asked, his voice sharp. I let the question hang in the air, savoring the tension. And then, with a smile as cold as the steel edge of a knife, I pressed my thumb against the button. The speakers hidden in the corners of the dining room crackled to life. And just as the first word spilled into the room, his voice, her voice, entwined in the most intimate betrayal. I sat back in my chair, folded my hands neatly in my lap, and watched the world I'd been forced to live in start to burn. Before the lies, before the gaslighting, before I learned how betrayal feels in the marrow of your bones, there was a life that, from the outside, looked enviable. I was 38, married to a man who wore success like a tailored suit, and living in Chicago's Gold Coast in a condo with views of the lake glittering like diamonds at night. People thought I had it all. A devoted husband, a best friend who felt more like a sister, a seat at the Evans family's table, one of those dynasties whispered about in business magazines. If you measured life in appearances, mine looked untouchable. But appearances are illusions, and illusions always come at a cost. I met Daniel in my late 20s, when I was working as an interior designer for a boutique firm downtown. He wasn't just handsome, he was magnetic. Charcoal gray suit, confident handshake, that easy laugh that made people want to lean in closer. He came from money. Evans Construction was a giant in Chicago real estate, but he had a way of making it sound like he was just another hard-working guy. He told me once, over cocktails at the Peninsula, that he loved how real I was compared to the women in his circles. At the time, I believed him. At the time, I thought that meant I was chosen. And for a while, it felt true. He brought me into his world of charity galas, rooftop dinners, and vacations that looked like spreads in glossy travel magazines. We married in a cathedral filled with white roses and violinists, the kind of wedding that left people whispering for months. For the first couple of years, I was genuinely happy. I loved designing spaces. I loved coming home to someone who seemed proud to introduce me as his wife. And I loved knowing I had a partner who promised forever. Then there was her, Melissa. Melissa and I had been inseparable since college. We'd shared everything: apartments, secrets, dreams scribbled on napkins at 2 a.m. She was my maid of honor, my confidant, the godmother to my niece. She had this laugh that could light up a room, and when she hugged you, you felt like you mattered. People used to say we were more like sisters than friends, and I believed that too. When Daniel and Melissa got along, I thought it was perfect. My husband and my best friend, the two people I trusted most, laughing together at dinner parties, planning surprise birthdays for me, standing side by side at family holidays. How many women could say they had that? I used to look across a crowded room at them and think, I am the luckiest woman alive. But luck has a way of hiding the cracks beneath the surface. Daniel's charm, I would later learn, wasn't reserved for me. He was always on, always performing. At dinners with his family, he played the dutiful son, passing wine to his mother, engaging his father in business talk, pretending to care about his sister's kids. But there was something almost rehearsed about it, as if he'd studied the role of perfect man and knew exactly how to hit his marks. When we were alone, the performance sometimes slipped. A sharp comment about my career not being serious, a dismissive shrug when I wanted to talk about starting a family. They were small things, easy to excuse, until they weren't. And Melissa, she had her flaws too, though back then I called them quirks. She loved attention, thrived on being the center of every story. At parties, she could captivate a crowd with tales of her travels or exaggerated disasters, and I admired that confidence. But there were moments, subtle ones, when her humor cut too close to the bone. Jokes about me being too uptight or playing housewife landed heavier than they should have. I told myself it was just her way. Best friends don't mean harm, right? Life settled into routines that felt comfortable, if not always perfect. My days were filled with client meetings, swatches of fabric, and late-night sketching designs at my desk. Daniel traveled often for work, which I accepted as part of being married to a man building empires. Melissa would keep me company when he was gone. Wine nights, Netflix marathons, long talks about our futures. I thought those nights were proof of loyalty. In hindsight, they were cover. There were good moments, of course. Saturday mornings when Daniel would make pancakes, humming off-key in the kitchen. Summers on the lake with friends. Melissa stretched out beside me on the deck, laughing under the sun. Christmases when his entire family gathered in their sprawling Winnetka mansion. Fireplaces glowing, the tree dripping in crystal ornaments. For a while, I clung to those moments, convinced they were the definition of happiness. But even then, shadows stretched along the edges. I remember one night, a year before everything exploded, when Daniel came home late from meetings. His tie was loose, his hair a little disheveled. I teased him about working too hard, but his response was sharp, defensive, a flicker of anger I hadn't expected. "Why do you always have to question me?" he snapped, pouring himself a drink without meeting my eyes. The moment passed quickly, smoothed over with an apology, but it stuck with me. It felt wrong. Melissa noticed too. The next day, she tilted her head and asked if everything was okay between us. I brushed it off, telling her it was just stress. She smiled, that warm, knowing smile, and said, "Of course. You're probably overthinking." The way she said it should have raised alarms. Instead, I let it soothe me, because that's what love and loyalty do. They blind you to the warning signs. Looking back now, I can see how carefully they set the stage. Daniel's subtle undermining of my confidence. Melissa's role as the comforting friend, always ready with reassurance. The two of them weaving a narrative that left me second-guessing myself at every turn. At the time, though, I was still living in the illusion, still believing I had a marriage worth fighting for, a best friend who would never betray me, a family that saw me as one of their own. The cracks widened slowly. Daniel's phone always face down on the counter. Melissa's sudden cancellations on our plans with vague excuses. Little things, inconsequential on their own, but together they hummed with something I couldn't name. And when I did try to name it, to voice my unease, the world around me, Daniel, Melissa, even his family, would tilt their heads in practiced disbelief. "Catherine, you worry too much. You're imagining things again. You should really relax. You're starting to sound crazy." Crazy? That word wrapped itself around me like a noose. But before the noose tightened, before I lost myself completely, there was one night, one red flag I should have seen for what it was. We were at the Evans annual holiday gala, a glittering affair that drew half of Chicago's elite. Daniel had been unusually attentive all evening, introducing me proudly to investors, making sure my glass was never empty. Melissa arrived late, slipping into the ballroom in a crimson dress that turned every head. Daniel's eyes followed her across the room, just for a second too long. And when she finally reached us, breathless and glowing, he leaned in to whisper something in her ear. She laughed, brushing his arm as though it was the most natural thing in the world. I caught the moment, that tiny, electric spark between them. It was gone in an instant, buried beneath champagne toasts and dance music. But it burned in the back of my mind all night. Later, when I asked Daniel about it, he kissed my forehead and said, "You're imagining things, Kat. Don't start again." I let it go. I shouldn't have, because that was the beginning of the end. They say betrayal doesn't announce itself, that it creeps in, soft and sly, like a shadow slipping under the door. But that's a lie. My betrayal didn't creep. It crashed into my life like glass shattering on marble, loud, undeniable, impossible to ignore. It began on a Thursday night. Daniel had told me he was stuck at the office again, some late meeting with investors. I didn't question it. I had learned not to. Every time I did, he'd roll his eyes, call me paranoid, remind me of how demanding his family business could be. So I poured myself a glass of wine, settled onto the sofa with design sketches, and tried to ignore the gnawing loneliness that had become my constant companion. That's when Melissa called. Her voice was casual, light, but something about it prickled under my skin. She said she couldn't make our Friday night plans because she was burned out from work. I told her it was fine, that I understood. We hung up quickly, too quickly. And then silence pressed down around me. Something in my gut twisted. A quiet, unshakable knowing. I couldn't name it yet, but it drove me to my laptop to open Daniel's iPad, the one he thought I never touched. He wasn't reckless, not usually, but arrogance breeds mistakes. And there, tucked into a folder he thought was private, I found the first crack in their carefully painted portrait. Text messages. Daniel, "Can't stop thinking about last night." Melissa, "You'll have to. People are starting to notice." Daniel, "Let them. She'll never believe it." Melissa, "She already suspects. You're too careless." Daniel, "Doesn't matter. I've convinced her she's losing it." My hands shook as I scrolled, each word carving deeper into me. They weren't just sleeping together. They weren't just betraying me in secret. They were working together to dismantle my sanity, brick by brick, until I doubted myself completely. And it worked. God, it had worked so well. Every time I questioned him, every time I looked at Melissa with suspicion, they had laughed behind my back, twisting my reality until I felt like the unstable one. The cruel genius of it hit me like a tidal wave. Their affair wasn't an accident. It was calculated, coordinated. A performance with me cast as the madwoman no one would believe. I dropped the iPad onto the couch as though it had burned me. My chest heaved, my pulse thundered in my ears. A part of me wanted to scream, to smash everything in sight. But the scream caught in my throat, strangled by something colder. Disbelief. the kind that hollows you out from the inside. I paced the condo, my glass of wine abandoned, my body shaking with adrenaline. Images collided in my mind. Melissa braiding my hair on my wedding morning, promising she'd never let anyone hurt me. Daniel holding me in the hospital after my miscarriage 2 years earlier, whispering that we'd try again, that he'd never leave me. Every moment of intimacy, of trust, rewrote itself in real time into a grotesque theater of lies. I thought I might vomit. I thought I might collapse. But instead, I froze, like an animal cornered. And then, as if to mock me further, my phone buzzed. A message from Melissa. Thinking of you tonight. Love you, sis. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. She had the audacity to call me sis, while her words with Daniel were still glowing on the iPad, evidence of her treachery. It was so surreal, so cruel, that I laughed. A bitter, broken laugh that scraped out of me like rust. For days, I spiraled between numbness and rage. I barely slept. Food turned to ash in my mouth. Daniel kept up the charade, kissing my cheek in the mornings, leaving for meetings, returning late with excuses rehearsed to perfection. Melissa called often, asking if I was okay. Her tone so gentle, so rehearsed, I wanted to rip the phone from the wall. But grief, I learned, is a strange alchemy. It doesn't stay grief forever. It mutates, sharpens. The more I replayed their words in my head, the more something inside me hardened. Shock gave way to clarity. Rage gave way to resolve. The breaking point came one night 2 weeks later. Daniel had come home late again, his tie askew, his phone glued to his hand. I asked him, calm but direct, if he was with her. He looked at me, his expression a perfect mask of pity and exasperation, and said, "Catherine, do you hear yourself? You're not well. Everyone sees it. Even Melissa is worried about you. Why do you insist on destroying yourself like this?" Destroying myself. The words rang in my ears long after he'd gone to bed. In that moment, I realized the truth. I wasn't the one being destroyed. I was being erased. Piece by piece, they were burying me alive under their lies, waiting for me to break so completely that no one would believe me if I screamed. That night, I sat alone in the dark living room, staring out at the Chicago skyline, the city lights smearing like tears. And something shifted inside me. I would not scream. I would not break. I would not be erased. If they wanted me to play the role of the crazy, paranoid wife, fine. I would play it to perfection. I would let them believe they'd won, let them laugh behind my back, let them think I was blind. And while they performed their cruelty, I would gather my weapons. The iPad was just the beginning. Their arrogance would be their undoing. I would find the cracks, collect every word, every whisper, every secret they thought was safe, and when the time was right, I wouldn't just expose them, I would destroy them. That thought was a spark. Small at first, but steady, unyielding. And as I sat in the quiet glow of the city that night, I knew one thing with terrifying certainty. Revenge wasn't just an option. It was the only way to survive. There comes a moment when grief dies, when tears dry up, and what's left behind is something colder, sharper. That moment came for me on an unremarkable Sunday morning. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through his phone, sipping coffee as if he hadn't gutted me from the inside out. Melissa had been over the night before, dropping off a bottle of wine, laughing in my living room, acting as though her hands weren't already stained with betrayal. They thought I was still blind, or worse, that I was too weak to do anything even if I knew. But weakness has a strange way of becoming steel. I watched Daniel over the rim of my mug that morning, the early sunlight catching on his watch, his wedding band glinting like a lie carved in gold. He didn't look at me. He hadn't really looked at me in weeks, maybe months. To him, I was already fading into the background, just another piece of furniture in the perfect life he had staged. That's the thing about men like Daniel. They believe their own performance. They convince themselves they're untouchable. "Are you going to see Melissa today?" I asked casually, my tone light, almost bored. He glanced up just for a second, then shook his head. She's busy. Work stuff. Why? I smiled faintly, setting my mug down. No reason. He didn't hear the edge beneath my words. He didn't notice the way my eyes lingered on his phone, or the stillness of my hands. He thought the storm had passed. That his gaslighting had worked so well, I had accepted the role of paranoid, fragile wife. But inside, I wasn't fragile. I was calculating. And with every second that passed, I felt the scales tip from victim to executioner. The decision wasn't loud. It wasn't some dramatic vow shouted into the night. It was quiet, almost ordinary. A simple thought that settled into my bones. If you destroy me, I will destroy you first. And once that thought rooted itself, there was no turning back. Daniel and Melissa underestimated me for the same reason predators underestimate their prey. Because I had gone still. They mistook silence for defeat. They didn't see the way I studied them now, every interaction, every slip of the tongue. They didn't notice how often I lingered near doors, how carefully I watched the reflection of their faces in mirrors. They didn't realize that the woman they thought was unraveling was, in fact, weaving something stronger, darker. Melissa continued to play the role of loyal friend, her visits peppered with fake concern. She'd tilt her head, eyes soft with practiced sympathy, and ask if I was managing okay. Sometimes she'd brush my hair back like she used to in college, as if affection could erase the words I'd already read on Daniel's iPad. Her audacity was almost breathtaking. One evening, she looked at me across my own kitchen island and said, "You know, Kat, you've got to stop overthinking everything. Daniel loves you. You're lucky to have him. Lucky." The word sat on my tongue like poison. I wanted to laugh in her face. I wanted to scream until the walls shook. But I did neither. I smiled, nodded, poured her another glass of wine, and filed the moment away in the growing archive of her cruelty. Because that was the other thing I had begun to understand. Revenge is not built in a single act. It is built piece by piece, brick by brick, until the foundation is so solid it cannot be ignored. The turning point crystallized a week later, when Daniel's family invited us to a Sunday dinner in Winnetka. We were seated at that long mahogany table, candles flickering, wine glasses gleaming. And as I listened to his father praise Daniel's integrity in business, as his mother clasped Melissa's hand and said how grateful she was for her friendship with me, something inside me snapped, not in weakness, but in clarity. These people, this family, this man, and this so-called best friend, they had all been complicit in painting me as unstable. Whether they knew the details or not, they believed the lies because it was easier. They let me carry the burden of suspicion while Daniel and Melissa played their parts flawlessly. That night, as laughter filled the room and Daniel leaned in to whisper something that made Melissa's cheeks flush, I saw it all for what it was. A performance, a grotesque play in which I had been cast as the fool. But every performance needs an ending, and I would be the one to write it. When we left that dinner, Daniel's hand resting lightly at the small of my back, I didn't feel the same hollow ache that had followed me for weeks. I felt something colder, more precise. The ache had transformed into intent. Revenge was no longer an idea. It was a decision. Back at home, I sat at my vanity, staring into the mirror long after Daniel had fallen asleep. My reflection looked the same brown eyes, the same chestnut hair, the same faint line of worry between my brows. But beneath the surface, something was unrecognizable. Something had shifted. "You think I'm crazy," I whispered into the empty room, testing the words aloud. "Fine. Let me show you what crazy can do." The words didn't tremble. They steadied me. The beauty of revenge is in its invisibility. When you do it right, no one sees it coming until it's too late. And that night, as I brushed my hair back and slipped beneath the covers, I already knew where I would start. I already knew the first thread I would pull from their carefully woven web. Melissa and Daniel thought they had silenced me. They thought they had buried me under doubt and shame. But what they didn't know was that I had already begun, and by the time they realized it, there would be nothing left of the world they had built together. Nothing but ashes. Revenge isn't improvised. It's not heat-of-the-moment rage or some impulsive act you regret later. True revenge is a craft, a design. And as an interior designer, I knew something about design. The way every line, every shade, every hidden detail came together to transform a space. I decided to treat their downfall the same way. Carefully measured, meticulously constructed, with no corner left untouched. The first step was evidence. Words meant nothing without proof. Daniel had already branded me paranoid. Melissa had joined the chorus, and his family, loyal to a fault, had absorbed their narrative without question. If I marched in with accusations, I would be dismissed as unstable. I needed more than suspicion. I needed their own voices to damn them. I started small. One evening, while Daniel showered, I slipped his phone from the nightstand. My hands didn't shake. My breathing stayed even. The passcode was easy. His birthday, arrogant in its simplicity. I scrolled through messages, finding the familiar lies. Working late. Meetings ran over. Can't talk now. But what caught my attention were the gaps. Strings of deleted texts, conversations scrubbed clean. He thought deleting meant erasing. He didn't realize the iCloud backup was still intact. That night, while he slept beside me, I synced his messages to my laptop. Thousands of texts spilled across the screen, dozens of calls at odd hours, and buried in the digital rubble were the ones he had missed. Messages Melissa had forgotten to erase. Words like last night and our secret and don't let her find out. They weren't explicit enough to win a courtroom, but they were enough to thread into the noose I was weaving. Still, texts could be denied, twisted, explained away. What I needed was irrefutable sound, their voices, caught in the act. So I bought a small digital recorder, sleek and silent, the kind journalists use. It fit perfectly inside the lining of my handbag. Melissa made it almost too easy. She continued her visits, pouring wine, laughing with me as though nothing had changed. I smiled back, listening, nodding, playing the role of grateful friend. But before she arrived one evening, I slipped the recorder under a stack of magazines on the coffee table. When Daniel dropped by half an hour later, I excused myself to the kitchen, heart pounding, ears straining. Their whispers floated through the room, muffled but damning. Melissa's voice. She doesn't suspect a thing. Daniel's laugh. Even if she did, no one would believe her. I stood in the dark kitchen, fingers digging into the marble counter, forcing myself not to storm back in and scream. Instead, I let the recorder capture every word. When they left, the evidence was mine. Their laughter, their arrogance, crystallized into a weapon I could use. Listening back, I felt fury. Yes, but also power. They weren't just betraying me. They were underestimating me. And underestimation is the sweetest weakness to exploit. Of course, revenge requires patience. Too much too soon and they'd sniff out the trap. So I lived my double life. Catherine, the docile wife, the loyal friend, smiling at dinners, nodding at small talk. And beneath that mask, Catherine the strategist, stitching together every piece of their downfall. I tested boundaries, pushing closer to the edge of exposure. Once, when Daniel left his laptop open, I pretended to walk past, but instead lingered, memorizing a half-written email to Melissa about a hotel reservation. Later, I searched the reservation system myself, pulling up the details. Another night, Melissa excused herself to take a call in the hallway while visiting. I crept near the doorway, recorder in my pocket, capturing just enough to confirm what I already knew. Every time I stole another piece of their puzzle, the stakes climbed higher. If Daniel caught me on his devices, he'd spin it into proof of my paranoia. If Melissa realized I was listening, she'd twist it into pity. Poor Catherine, spying on her only friend. And yet, the closer I skated to the edge, the stronger I felt. Because every secret I uncovered, every lie I documented, was another brick in the gallows they were building for themselves. Weeks turned into months. My folder of evidence grew. Screenshots of texts, copies of hotel receipts, audio files neatly labeled and stored on a hidden drive. I cataloged them like a collector, each one a trophy of their arrogance. And still, I played the part. I let Daniel kiss my cheek in public, let Melissa rest her head on my shoulder in photos. At family gatherings, I laughed at their jokes, poured wine, and listened as they spoke about loyalty and trust, as if they owned the words. But inside, I was already dismantling their empire. The hardest moments were when I nearly broke character. Once, Daniel handed me his phone to show me a news article, forgetting he had left a message thread open. Melissa's name glared up at me. My breath hitched, and for a second I thought he saw it in my eyes. But I smiled, handed the phone back, and asked if he wanted more coffee. He bought the act without hesitation. Another time, Melissa stumbled, tipsy from wine, and let Daniel's name slip into a sentence meant to sound innocent. When we went to the store. She froze, eyes flicking to mine. My heart slammed against my ribs, but I only laughed, teasing her about her clumsy storytelling. She exhaled in relief, never realizing the recorder tucked inside my purse had caught her slip. Close calls like those reminded me of the razor's edge I walked. But they also fueled me. Because each time I fooled them, each time they looked at me and saw only the naive wife, I grew stronger, more certain. Revenge isn't just about punishing betrayal, it's about reclaiming control. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt control slip back into my hands like a blade I'd been denied too long. One night, sitting at my desk with the Chicago skyline glowing beyond the window, I laid out everything I had. The texts, the receipts, the recordings, the photographs I'd quietly taken when Melissa thought she wasn't being watched. I spread them across the desk like puzzle pieces, arranging, rearranging, seeing the story take shape. The narrative they had built, Catherine the crazy, Catherine the paranoid, was about to be dismantled, crushed under the weight of their own words. And in that moment, staring at the arsenal I had built, I realized something. The plan was no longer forming. It was ready. Every piece was in place. Every mask was about to crack. All that remained was execution. And when I executed, it wouldn't just be a revelation, it would be annihilation. Revenge isn't fire and fury. Not at first. It's quiet, controlled. The calm before a storm so violent no one survives untouched. That night at the Evans family dinner, I was the calm. I wore a simple black dress, pearls at my throat, hair pinned neatly. I looked every bit the loyal wife, the gracious daughter-in-law, the best friend. I smiled when expected, passed dishes around the table, even laughed at jokes. From the outside, I was flawless. But inside, I was coiled steel, ready to strike. The mahogany table gleamed under candlelight. Crystal glasses sparkled. Laughter drifted like smoke. Daniel sat at the head of the table, the golden sun, basking in the admiration of his family. To his right, Melissa leaned close, her hand brushing his arm in ways subtle enough to pass unnoticed, unless you knew what to look for. And I knew. In my hand, under the table, was the remote, my weapon. Daniel tapped his glass, the sound silencing the room. He stood, charming smile in place, raising his glass of wine. To family, he began, his voice rich and confident. To loyalty, trust, and love, the things that hold us together through everything. I almost laughed at the hypocrisy, but instead I raised my own glass, lips curved in a faint smile. Yes, I said softly, to loyalty, to trust, and to truth. He glanced at me, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. But the toast went on, laughter and applause filling the air. I let them have their moment, let them revel in their illusions a little longer, because I knew what was coming. The moment the noise died down, I pressed the button. At first, it was a crackle of static, faint enough to make people glance around in confusion. Then Daniel's voice filled the dining room, clear and sharp, spilling from the hidden speakers. "I can't stop thinking about last night." Melissa's voice followed, breathless, intimate. "You'll have to. People are starting to notice." A hush fell over the table. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Glasses hovered mid-air. Then Daniel's laugh echoed through the room. "Let them. She'll never believe it." The blood drained from his face in real time, his jaw clenching, eyes wide. Melissa's hand flew to her mouth, color draining from her cheeks. What is this?" Daniel stammered, looking at me. I didn't answer. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in my lap as their own voices continued to betray them. Even if she did, no one would believe her. Melissa's recorded voice purred. The silence that followed was deafening. Every member of the Evans family stared, eyes flicking between Daniel, Melissa, and me. Daniel tried to recover, his mask cracking but not yet shattered. This is some trick. "Catherine, she's edited this, But then another recording played, layered over his denial. Melissa again. "You know she's starting to sound crazy. Keep feeding that. The more unstable she looks, the safer we are." Gasps erupted around the table. His mother clutched her pearls, his father's face hardened, his sister shook her head in disbelief. I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm, steady, cutting through the noise. "This isn't edited. It isn't fabricated. This is what you've both been doing to me for months, telling me I was paranoid, convincing everyone I was unstable, while you carried on your affair right under my nose." Daniel stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "You're insane!" he shouted, desperation cracking his voice. "This isn't—" But then the final clip played, clear, undeniable. Melissa's voice. "Meet me at the hotel again tomorrow, same room." Daniel's reply. "Of course, she'll never know." Silence swallowed the room whole. Daniel's father rose slowly, his expression carved from stone. "Is this true?" he demanded. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. Melissa stuttered. It's not. It's taken out of—" But the evidence was irrefutable. Their voices, their words, their betrayal. And then came the final blow. I stood, reaching into my clutch, and pulled out a neat stack of printed papers. Receipts, photographs, transcripts of messages. I dropped them onto the center of the table, the papers fanning out like blood blooming in water. "Hotel receipts," I said coldly. "Dates, times, proof, all while telling me I was losing my mind." Melissa pushed back from the table, her eyes wide with panic. "Catherine, please—" But I cut her off, my tone slicing sharper than any scream. Don't you dare call me by my name like you still have the right to." The weight of the room shifted. His mother looked at me with horror, not at me, but at her son. His father's face darkened with disgust. His sister muttered something under her breath about being ashamed. Daniel tried once more to salvage it, his voice cracking under the strain. "Catherine, we can talk about this privately. You don't need to—" "Privately?" I snapped. "You humiliated me publicly. You branded me as crazy to every single person in this room. So this stays public." The silence that followed was brutal. Every eye was on him, on her, on the wreckage of the lies they'd built. Melissa burst into tears, mascara streaking her face. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, rage burning in his eyes. But there was no defense left, no spin that could erase the sound of their own voices or the proof laid bare in front of their family. And then I delivered the last strike. "I've already filed for divorce," I said calmly, pulling another envelope from my bag and sliding it across the table to his father. "With full disclosure of your infidelity, Daniel. Your company prides itself on family values, doesn't it? Imagine what happens when this goes public." His father opened the envelope, scanned the documents, and his face twisted with fury. Not at me. At Daniel. "You've disgraced this family," he spat. Daniel's mouth opened, but his father's voice cut him down. "You're finished." The words hung in the air, final and unshakable. Melissa stood suddenly, chair scraping back, but no one comforted her. No one reached for her hand. She was alone. Daniel, too. The perfect son, the golden husband, the charming liar, exposed, gutted, humiliated in front of the only audience that had ever mattered to him. I sat back down slowly, smoothing my dress, calm as ever. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. This was exactly as I had planned. Daniel's voice finally broke the silence, trembling, desperate. "Catherine, please." But I didn't even look at him. I simply stood, gathered my clutch, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, I turned back just once, meeting his eyes. "You wanted me to look crazy," I said, my voice cold as ice. "Now look at yourself." And with that, I walked out. Behind me, the empire of lies collapsed, brick by brick, leaving Daniel and Melissa in ruins with no way back. Revenge doesn't end in the moment you strike. It lingers. It ripples. It spreads through every corner of the lives it touches until nothing remains the same. In the weeks after that dinner, the Evans family mansion became a graveyard of silence. Daniel's parents stopped returning his calls. His sister, who once adored him, sent back the gifts he tried to use as apologies. The family business, that fortress of power and wealth, distanced itself from him with surgical precision. Daniel was quietly removed from projects, his name stripped from public announcements. For a man who thrived on status, on admiration, the exile was worse than death. Melissa fared no better. The whispers spread fast through her circles. The affair, the lies, the recordings. Invitations dried up, clients disappeared. Her social media, once curated with smiling brunches and glamorous nights out, turned into a wasteland of silence. She had built her life on being admired, envied. Now she was pitied, or worse, ignored. As for Daniel and me, the divorce proceedings were swift. The recordings, the receipts, the proof I had meticulously gathered left no room for argument. The court sided with me easily, granting me the condo, a sizable portion of his assets, and freedom with my name intact. Every time I walked into that courtroom, he looked smaller, diminished, a man hollowed out by his own arrogance. The best part? I never raised my voice. I never had to. His own words destroyed him more thoroughly than I ever could have with rage. But revenge has layers, and I had prepared one more. One morning, about a month after the dinner, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a photograph, a glossy black-and-white image of Daniel standing outside a cheap motel, looking over his shoulder like a man who knew he'd fallen. No note, no signature. Just the image. For a moment, I froze. Had someone else been watching him too? Or was it Melissa, desperate to claw back power with some half-baked threat? Then I turned the photo over. On the back, in Daniel's handwriting, were 3 words. "Please forgive me. Forgive." As if that word could unspool everything he had done, I burned the photo in the sink and watched the ashes swirl down the drain. That was my answer. Still, there was one final twist left. 2 months later, I was at a cafe in Lincoln Park, sipping coffee by the window, when I heard raised voices outside. I glanced up just in time to see Daniel, disheveled, unshaven, no suit, no watch, being shoved by his father in front of the entire staff of Evans Construction. The words carried even through the glass. "You are no son of mine," his father spat. Daniel staggered back, his eyes darting around as pedestrians slowed to watch. Once, he had been the golden boy of Chicago real estate. Now, he was a spectacle, a public disgrace. And then he saw me. Our eyes met through the cafe window. For a split second, I thought he might storm inside, beg, rage, do anything to claw back what he'd lost. But he didn't. He just froze, shame and hatred warring in his expression, before turning and walking away into the crowd. That should have been enough. But fate, it seemed, wasn't done twisting the knife. A week later, Melissa's name appeared in the news. A drunk driving arrest, mugshot plastered across every local site, no family at her side, no friends posting bail. Alone. Utterly alone. And me? I walked free, my name intact, my sanity proven, my silence finally broken. But here's the part no one knows. The twist that still makes me smile when I close my eyes at night. The recordings they heard that night at the dinner? That wasn't all of it. The family, the court, they only got fragments. Enough to destroy them, yes, but not everything. Because hidden away in a safe deposit box only I can access lies the full unedited collection. Hours of whispers, hotel confessions, mocking laughter about how easy it was to convince me I was crazy. Enough to bury them 100 times over. And if they ever try to crawl back into power, if they ever dare to breathe my name in contempt again, I'll press play all over again, because my revenge isn't finished. It's eternal. Thank you for watching Catherine's story of betrayal and revenge. If you've ever faced deception, or had to fight back against those who tried to silence you, I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your voice matters here. These stories aren't just entertainment. They remind us of resilience, power, and justice when it matters most. If this story struck a chord with you, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss the next tale.